Next on AM 1480 WLEA, The Newsmaker Show. Here's Brian O'Neill.
He's our regular Tuesday guest. He's Dr. Gary Ostrower, longtime history professor at Alfred University. Dr. Ostrower, thanks for calling in this morning.
Hey, a pleasure to be here, Brian.
Are you in Olean or Alfred today?
I am in Olean. A good deal of fog on the way to Olean from Alfred this morning.
Dr. Ostrower does some university work over at St. Bonaventure. What is it you do exactly, Gary?
I am the Ombuds Officer, and the Ombuds Officer, for those of you who may not be familiar with the term, it's a Swedish term. It kind of means problem solver, conflict resolution, that sort of thing. And so I'm here to do both of those, just serve as an intermediary with people who may have problems. I might add, by the way, that I do the same thing at Alfred University. I've had about 16 years of experience doing this kind of work.
Interesting. Well, Dr. Ostrower, let's get right to it with New Hampshire. Any thoughts, any predictions, any observations this morning?
Well, since most of my predictions turn out to be wrong, I'm a little bit hesitant to offer a prediction, other than to say that, if Vice President Biden comes in, perhaps fourth in New Hampshire today, I think it's going to be really, really damaging to his campaign. I mean, he began the campaign a few months ago as the front runner. And if you're the front runner, then by golly, you better be running in front. Well, he certainly did not run in front. He had a very weak showing in Iowa during the caucuses. And if he has an equally weak showing here, I think he's probably finished. I don't care about the fact that we're told that he has a lot of support among black people in South Carolina. That primary is coming up, I believe, just next week. But you can't keep coming in fourth. You really have to show that you have strength. And the reason is that if you wind up as, let's say, fourth in Iowa, fourth in New Hampshire, his money is going to drive up. People are not going to contribute to the campaign. And you cannot win a campaign in contemporary America without a lot of money. That's why, for instance, someone like Michael Bloomberg, a Democratic candidate who has not been a part of the caucus in Iowa or of the primary in New Hampshire, nevertheless, he has to be taken very, very seriously. He makes Trump look like a piker. We don't really know. None of us know whether President Trump is a billionaire or not. Not until he reveals his income taxes, his 1040, will we know the answer to that. And one of the reasons why he may not be making his income taxes available is precisely for that reason, because he has things that he wants to hide. And that includes the possibility that he's not a billionaire.
That he's a multimillionaire instead?
Not making, any substantial charitable contributions whatsoever. It may include the fact that he has a lot of investment in Russia. That's perhaps why he's so very, very kind to Vladimir Putin. But regardless of all of that, you have to have funds in order to run for president. The surprise, I think, may be that Amy Klobuchar comes in perhaps second or third. She certainly has been rising in the polls in recent days. She gave a very, very good debate performance last week. As a matter of fact, I think all of her debate performance has been quite good. She has a lot of energy. She's not all that old. I mean, she's, I think, if I'm not mistaken, around 60 years old. She's not in her 70s, much less her late 70s, like people like Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden. And so I think she has a lot going for her. She's very sharp. She's very disciplined. She has a good organization in New Hampshire, and she's seen as beating expectations. And that kind of perception is going to help her. But whether or not she has enough momentum to overcome people who have had, electoral advantages in the past remains to be seen. And by the way, Elizabeth Warren, who comes from next door, she may do surprisingly well. After Iowa, a lot of people were almost writing her off. But, New Hampshire is right next door to Massachusetts, where she lives, and we may find that because she has a lot of discipline, because she has a very, very well thought out program, we may find her coming back. And so, from my perspective, all bets are off.
Dr. Ostrower, do you see Klobuchar getting picked as VP if she does badly in this primary and upcoming primaries? Do you think anyone would choose her?
I think she has a reasonable chance of being a VP candidate. I've often thought that maybe she's really running for VP rather than for president. But all of the candidates among the Democrats, from Tom Steyer to Bloomberg to Biden and so forth, a whole bunch of them, they happen to be Caucasian. They have white skin. And in the Democratic Party today, I think you may have to choose someone who is African American, someone like Cory Booker or someone like Stacey Abrams, who had run for governor, if I'm not mistaken, in Georgia 2 years ago. You may have to have someone, in other words, who's going to appeal to an African-American constituency. And I think that is the problem for Amy. Otherwise, if, let's say, someone like Bernie Sanders, who's a socialist, he's not even a Democrat, if he had to choose someone as a running mate, he might choose Amy Klobuchar because she's kind of a centrist. But I think that the issue of race is going to matter a lot, and my hunch is that you're going to have a non-white candidate for vice president, no matter who wins the Democratic nomination for president.
Dr. Ostrower, I'm kind of curious, what do you think about the issue of climate change? How much will it play in this election cycle? It's kind of an interesting thing because there's a lot of division on that. A lot of people on the right completely dismiss it. For a lot of people on the left, it's their biggest issue. How do you think the people in the center are going to feel, and how much of an issue do you think it's going to be in November?
I think it will be a moderately sized issue, but not a huge issue. I would agree with those people who say it is the most important single issue that we are facing as a country. It's more important than the economy right now. It's more important than infrastructure. It's more important than anything. Okay, and I think that 15, 20, 30 years from now, we're all going to recognize that. However, in the short run, most people tend to focus on the economy. You may remember way back when Bill Clinton ran for president in 1992, his slogan was, "It's the economy, stupid." And I think that remains in many ways the case right now. And I'm kind of interested in the way in which, for instance, just yesterday, President Trump showed up for a rally in New Hampshire. And it was a large rally. About 10,000 people showed up. They were clearly committed, the way that so many of the people supporting Trump have been committed. And what did Trump emphasize during the rally? He emphasized how well the economy is doing. And the economy is doing very well in some ways. Unemployment is down. I don't think it has been this low since about the 1970s. It's about 3.6%, and it can hardly go below that because, some people simply can't work, because of illness and so forth and so on. And by the same token, the stock market is at all-time high. It's over 29,000 on the Dow Jones Industrial Average right now. But having said that, there are weaknesses in the economy. The manufacturing sector, for instance, the manufacturing sector of the economy is not doing very, very well. Most CEOs of large corporations are much more pessimistic about the next 1 to 2 years than the public at large. So, I think that there are some real question marks here. And I guess the other point I would make is that, in small cities, Hornell is a small city. Berlin, New Hampshire is a small city. These cities are not doing all that well. Dresser-Rand has just announced that it's going to be leaving from Wellsville, and that's going to mean a big hole in the in the economy of Allegheny County, and not just of Allegheny County, but of the southern tier as well. I think that most of us are aware that while unemployment is down, by the same token, wages in many areas are down. So, for instance, in Berlin, New Hampshire, as an example, and I've just been reading about that town, so that's why I'm mentioning it. In Berlin, New Hampshire, the average wage for people involved in industries in that town was $22 an hour as recently as 10 years ago. Today, the new jobs, because because many of those industrial jobs, those manufacturing jobs, those $22 an hour jobs, they've disappeared. And there are new jobs which have reduced the amount of unemployment. But the new jobs are paying minimum wage. They're paying somewhere in the neighborhood of $10, $11 an hour. And that means that the poverty rate in Berlin, New Hampshire, has actually creeped upwards, and I think that's also going to be true here in the southern tier. So, we want jobs, we want good jobs, we want high-paying jobs, but we're really not getting them. And under those conditions, I think that we have to focus on things that are not very sexy, that are just not very, very well understood by the public. What we need is a national economic policy, the kind of economic policy that people like Alexander Hamilton, way back at the beginning of our republic, that people like George Kennan, the great American diplomat after World War II, were promoting. And we also have to understand that if we underinvest, which we're doing right now, if we underinvest in education and in infrastructure, it's going to cause us long-term harm. So, to go back to your initial question, I don't think that the climate change is going to play much of an issue. It should, but it's not going to. We really got to be focusing on on those elements of the economy which offer us long-term benefits, and I simply don't think that we're doing that right now.
Dr. Ostrower, a couple of conservative arguments I wanted to throw at you and to you and get your response. On the economy, you hear a lot of conservatives say things like the economic problems in New York State are caused by the downstate Democrats, the New York City Democrats in the legislature. Some of them blame Governor Andrew Cuomo for that. What would you say in response to that? That the other let me finish. The other part of that argument is that Trump's economy is good. It's because we're here in a Democrat state that things are a problem in places like Wellsville with the dresser ran, factory leaving. Your thoughts on that argument?
Well, I think that a lot of the economic stuff really has to do not with New York City, not with the fact that New York is a Democratic state or that New Jersey is a Democratic state. It has to do with international implications. So, for instance, President Trump, initiated, if you will, a trade war with China, and that seems to be moderating right now. It hasn't been as serious as I thought it was going to become, but by the same token, there are manufacturers in many, many areas of the United States, not only here in New York State, that were damaged by that. The price of steel went up. Tariffs obviously increased, and that was going to be those tariffs were going to be paid ultimately by the American consumer. So, I suppose New York City and the Democrats are an easy target, but that doesn't mean that they should be an easy target. I think that the problems go far, far beyond the Democrats. Now, if you want to argue that taxes in New York State are fairly high, that utilities in New York State are fairly high, which has nothing to do, I might add, with the Democrats, I think that's a factor in the lagging New York State economy. But there are many, many states. We talk about the decline of the Rust Belt. That has nothing to do with Democratic politics or Republican politics. It has to do with the nature of the international economy. And I think where many of the Republicans really go wrong right now is to argue along with Trump that we have to support America first. But what America first often means is America alone. And in the 21st century, to go it alone is simply not good enough. We have a genuinely internationalized economy. A bank that fails in Hong Kong may bring down banks in New York State and in Texas and in Florida and in California. We have an international interdependent economy, and unless you realize that, unless you come to terms with that, I think you're really living in the 19th century rather than the 21st century.
Another conservative argument I wanted to get your response on, Dr. Ostrower. You talked about education earlier in the show. A common argument from conservatives is the argument that giving more money to education does not improve education for students. You've spent a lifetime in the world of education. What do you make of that argument?
Well, I have some sympathy with it, but not entirely. We know that when we entrust the future of our children to their teachers, and then we deunionize those teachers, or we reduce the number of teachers, or we reduce the amount of salary that teachers are going to receive, we're not doing ourselves a favor. I think that one has to understand that teachers have as much of an economic need, a financial need, as anyone else in the economy. By the same token, throwing money at education per se is not necessarily going to solve the problems. I think that a lot of the problems with American education, and there are a lot of problems with American education today, I think a good deal of it has to do with home life. If kids come to school and they've never been read to, if these kids come to school and they have a vocabulary of 1,000 words, when in fact I'm talking about kindergarten, when they should have a vocabulary of 3,000 or 4,000 words by then, they're going to be disadvantaged. But by the same token, if that's the case, then we better have a good, well-funded program in early childhood education. And by and large, conservatives who claim that they don't want to spend money are simply not going to fund these sorts of things. But those same conservatives better look in the mirror, because President Trump has just proposed a budget of over $4 trillion. And that $4 trillion includes, I might add, sharp increases in funding for national defense, for funding for wartime needs, for weapon systems, which we probably don't really need when you're talking about the problem being terrorism and not more traditional warfare. But by the same token, it cuts in a number of different areas, in some very, very important areas. It cuts Medicaid, health care. It cuts funding for food stamps. It cuts funding for the EPA. I mean, you talk about climate change. This is madness. I think this is just, insanity. It cuts affordable housing funds. It cuts help assistance, if you will, for student loan programs. And so the president, I think, has a bunch of priorities that just do not make sense in the 21st century. Now, I know that, an awful lot of people out there will support Trump no matter what he does. The old statement about he can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and he's not going to lose support. Support for Trump has become something of a cult phenomenon these days. But we are not funding the kinds of programs, and that should include educational programs that the president is suggesting here.
Going to take a quick break. We'll be back and do our history segment with Dr. Gary Ostrower. Stay with us.
If you own your own business and need garbage removal, contact Lippincotts. And if you live in a town where you have to take care of your own garbage removal, contact Lippincotts. If you need garbage dumpsters, Lippincotts rents them, and Lippincotts can come pick up the garbage too. These days, you don't throw old electronic items in the trash, and Lippincotts can remove your old electronics. Lippincotts, for garbage removal, recycling, hauling, removal of asbestos or electronic items. For a free quote, visit LippinCottsRubbishInc.com. LippinCottsRubbishInc.com.
Checking in now with meteorologist Rob Carolyn, who says not only do we have snow coming in a couple of days and quite a bit of it, but he says this is going to go on for, a month and a half?
Well, it's going to be an active pattern, Brian. It doesn't mean we're going to be seeing snow every couple of days. The pattern has actually been leaning warmer than normal for much of this winter. We've got what we meteorologists refer to as a positive Arctic oscillation. So most of the cold air is locked up around the pole. Every so often we get a piece of it. That'll happen Friday and Saturday of this week. But generally the tendency will be for milder and milder weather to overspread the region. Got a lot of cloudiness out there this morning, even some areas of patchy fog. It looks like we may see a couple of breaks develop later today. Sun may peak out. We're up to 40 to 45. Brian, the sun came up this morning at 7:12. It's forecast to set tonight at 5:36. Now, tonight we're partly to mostly cloudy with 20 to 25. Little wedge of high pressure builds in from the north tomorrow, leading to partial sun, 40 to 45. Then low pressure comes up from the south tomorrow night. We'll see snow develop. By the time we get to Thursday morning, we could have 3 to 5 inches on the ground with 30 to 35. Another inch or two of snow possible Thursday before it ends, highs 35 to 40. And then it turns sharply colder for Friday and Saturday. Daytime highs on Friday, Brian, in the teens, and we're probably about 25 to 30 on Saturday.
All righty, thank you, Rob. Back with Dr. Gary Ostrower. Dr. Ostrower, I wanted to ask you a history question that's not on this day in history. You ready to move on to the history segment yet?
Sure.
Okay. You mentioned in your last segment there, a part about it's the economy, stupid, a slogan of Bill Clinton's back in 1992 when Bill Clinton first ran for president. Was the word stupid directed at George H.W. Bush, or did he mean anybody that did not, Bill Clinton mean anybody that does not understand that the big issue is the economy is stupid? Or was he talking right to Bush?
No, he was certainly not talking about Bush, and I don't even think he was ever accused of talking about Bush. It was really saying, "Hey, look, if you're if you have two eyes and two ears, you should understand by now that we're going to win this election on the basis of the economy, or we're going to lose it if we don't talk about the economy. So let's focus on the economy." So it was a kind of more generic kind of thing, and by and large, presidential candidates who have won have often focused on a single issue. For instance, Dwight Eisenhower, when he ran for president in 1952, he focused on one issue, and I don't want to say only one issue, but mainly one issue, and that was ending the Korean War. He said that he would go to Korea, that he would actually travel to Korea, work out some kind of a settlement, and he did exactly that. Now, he was aided by something. He was aided by the fact that in March of 1953, the leader of the Soviet Union, namely Joseph Stalin, died, and that really made things a lot easier because the Korean War would end in the summer of 1953. For Kennedy in 1960, he focused on foreign policy. He focused on the idea that the Eisenhower administration, Vice President Nixon was running for president then, of course, was lagging in respect to one especially important issue, and that is the building of missiles. He argued, for instance, that the United States was suffering from a missile gap with the Soviet Union. Well, again, that wasn't the only issue that he discussed during the campaign, but that became the main issue. And the real fact is that there was no missile gap. It was a phony charge, but it stuck, and Nixon was unable to answer it very, very effectively. So, if you don't have a really, really clear issue, good chance, I think, that you're going to lose the election. And by the way, during this year, if it turns out that Michael Bloomberg is going to win the Democratic nomination, which I think is certainly possible, I don't think it's by any means absurd to think that. My hunch is that he too is going to go back to the economy, and he's going to use the economy against President Trump in much the same way that Trump will try to use the economy against Bloomberg.
Well, that'll be an interesting thing to watch it play out. Dr. Ostrower, with that, we have to go. I want to thank you so much, as always, for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'll talk to you guys next week.